Okay, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and speakers, actually I'm very thankful and honored to be in this room with you all to moderate this discussion with such an important topic. As you know, the panel discussion today is on journalism reports impacting elections and democracy country cases. It's very relevant with today's situation where media and journalists in Southeast Asia are currently facing significant challenges in covering and reporting on elections, from limited access to election data to intimidation by law enforcement and pressures from candidate teams and political parties. So these are the challenges that we have to discuss today because it's threatening the press freedom and professionalism for the media to report the election. And since we are gathering here representing media and its multi-stakeholders from the regional, so we should also talk about the collaborations or the possible network that we can have to respond to these all situations. So as you know, I'm not going to take this stage too long. We already have 4 great speakers. I will call them one by one and to get on the stage and give the speech or presentation. So the first speaker is Mr. Cherian George. He's from Singapore and a professor of media studies in the Department of Journalism and director of Center for Media and Communication Research at Hong Kong Baptist University. Professor George is a specialist in some topics of the region related to journalism and its relation with political power. He is the author of some books analyzing the situation of press freedom and freedom of expressions in the region. His latest book, Media and Power in Southeast Asia, which just released, has some interesting section about media ownership pattern in non-communist Southeast Asia, intolerance in Indonesia and Myanmar, authoritarian resilience in Singapore, and digital disruptions in Vietnam and Malaysia. So I'm promoting your book, Professor Cherian, remember that? And today, as an academic, we will hear from Cherian's the reflection and his critical input about how media is covering elections in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Cherian George up to the stage.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So I have to start with a confession and an apology. I am speaking to you here today with a very big inferiority complex. I feel underqualified to talk to you, especially the journalists here, about election coverage, because although I have covered 2 parliamentary elections and 2 presidential elections during my time as a professional journalist, and a couple more as an academic and as a blogger, all this experience was in Singapore, which, as you know, has the least competitive, most predictable, and smallest elections in Southeast Asia. So this situation right here feels a bit like a school sports reporter trying to teach a room full of Champions League football correspondents how to do their jobs. I will try my best, drawing not from my personal experience on the ground, but from what scholars of media and politics like myself say about the press coverage of elections. I think what the news media do very well is covering elections as a competition, almost like a sport. This comes easily, comes naturally to journalists. We report on the different teams' strategies and tactics, the formations, who's up, who's down, who is likely to win and lose, followed at the end by post-match analysis and commentary. This is exciting work for most of us as journalists and also for the public to read, even in Singapore, where not every result is totally predictable. But I think there are at least 3 other election-related jobs that we need the media to do, and which they perform at different levels of competence. These are, first, the election watchdog role, for which I would give quality media in the world a score of, say, 7 upon 10. Second, the agenda setting role, for which the media might get 5 upon 10. And third, the cultural role, for which they would get a failing grade of 3 upon 10. To understand these roles, let's remind ourselves why elections and democracy matter. Now, we often think of elections as a game through which the winners get to govern. But that isn't really what makes democracy special. After all, human society has many other ways of picking winners. It's not complicated. You just kill all your opponents and until you're the only one left standing. Human societies have been doing that for millennia. What makes elections and democracy special is that it provides a non-violent way to resolve differences. But this, of course, requires that elections be seen as legitimate. Only when elections remain competitive, free, and fair will they be recognized as the so-called only game in town, acceptable even to the losers. So this brings us to the first media role that I mentioned, that of an election watchdog. The press has a key role in ensuring the integrity of elections. Even if there's a strong election commission to act as the referee, it usually can't spot every foul. We still need the media to provide a VAR role, providing scrutiny of election procedures and the conduct of candidates and their parties. I think several of the entries that came to our awards this year were of this sort, exposing election malpractices of various kinds. Another aspect of the election watchdog role is assessing party platforms and candidates' many promises and then fact-checking their claims. The Indonesian Check Fakta project, an experiment in collaborative fact-checking, is one interesting model that other countries can learn from. But overall, I think the world's media tend to cover candidates' promises and claims uncritically. Of course, professional journalists know the importance of reporting accurately, but due to time pressures mainly, they think that accurate reporting means factually reporting what a politician said, even if what he said is not factually accurate. In other words, we become a conveyor belt for the lies of politicians that we report uncritically. The media are even weaker at keeping the election focused on issues that really matter. This is the second role of the media that I was referring to, that of agenda setting. We need to remember that electoral competition on its own does not really provide an incentive to candidates to debate and raise the most important national issues facing their country. Quite the contrary. In the heat of an election, candidates try to avoid controversy and complexity. They try not to talk about the issues for which they don't have easy answers. So they avoid talking about job creation, for example, and instead switch to easy things like identity politics. Support me because I'm of a certain religion or race. Forget the fact that I don't actually have real answers to your problems. The media can help to correct this tendency by keeping the spotlight focused on issues that matter. And of course, this needs to be done long before the election, because in general, the closer a country gets to election season, the more our political coverage is forced to resemble sports reporting, with its obsession on conflict, on winners and losers. I think election reporters can learn instead from their colleagues who do health reporting. We know that a good health reporter doesn't just focus on which drugs are most popular, doesn't just report on pharmaceutical companies' wild claims, wild promises. Instead, she gets the best available evidence to inform readers about their choices, always focused on the welfare of the public, not the perspective of the suppliers, not the perspective of vested interests. Election reporting and political coverage more broadly, I think, also needs to remain similarly people-centric, covering what citizens need to know, not what politicians want to say. So aside from strengthening the integrity of elections and setting the agenda, the media, I think, have a third critical responsibility to help develop a political culture that is conducive to democracy. And this, I think, is where media are especially weak. This is why I'd give the world's media a failing grade in this respect. And this is probably because journalists themselves have not given serious thought to the importance of this aspect of democratic life. The truth is that a healthy democracy requires more than just incorruptible institutions and strong constitutional protections of political and civil liberties, as important as they are. Democracy is government by discussion. It's a commitment that we make to our fellow citizens that we will resolve our differences and decide our collective future through deliberation, through a conversation in which we all have an equal right to participate, and where the tiebreaker in an argument is reason, not violence, money, rank, or tradition. Now, this commitment requires citizens to have certain attitudes, instincts, and values, or what some political theorists have called habits of the heart that are pro-democratic. The core value is respect for the equal dignity and equal rights of fellow citizens. This translates into tolerance of different viewpoints and different ways of living. It also translates into an unflinching commitment to human rights of society's most vulnerable, not just the will of the majority. Democracy is not just a numbers game. The minority matters. When we look around the world today, we do see that even many established democracies are in crisis. Democracy as a whole is in a crisis. And I suspect that this crisis has less to do with poorly organized elections or corruption of political parties, though of course these are important problems, that it has more to do with this failure to build the required habits of the heart. So if we look at the wave of authoritarian populism, like in the Philippines, or extreme polarization, like in Thailand, or intolerant religious nationalism, like in Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, these are all symptoms of a pathological political culture. The required cultural shift cannot be achieved without help from the media. Realistically speaking, I'm sure we will all continue to cover elections like a sport, but that should not stop us from also framing electoral contests as just one part of democratic life. We need to train ourselves in the media and our publics to understand the rules of this much larger game. Currently, too many of our citizens equate democracy with majoritarianism rather than equality, with the popular will at the expense of minority rights. Too many see democracy as an event for choosing governments through elections. Too few recognize democracy as a process of government through discussion. That it's not primarily about winners and losers, but about how we all can negotiate and compromise to achieve the kind of collective progress and social justice that our societies desire. Thank you.